So this is my first question. I'm privileged as chair to ask Mr. Niu Bing, because Mr. Niu has been working on a large number of super high-rise buildings. So how can you deal with the conundrum, between the goal of low carbon and a high energy efficiency versus, the skyscrapers, the fact that they will consume a lot of energy? All right, this is a wonderful question from conference session chair. Yes, indeed. As we try to develop the super high-rise buildings, this is a critical point of concern that we have in our mind, because for skyscrapers, they will consume a lot of energy. They're not really, energy friendly. But as we try to develop the urban spaces, it is an indispensable trend to develop and build more and more skyscrapers. Then under these kind of circumstances, from the architect perspective, we have to minimize the energy consumption for high-rise buildings. There are two dimensions to energy consumption. We need to look at the entire life cycle of the building. First, upon the building cycle, the building materials that we use, from the cutting down of the trees in the forest, to the on-site installation and assembly, etc. This is the cost in energy consumption upon building cycle. Second, upon operational cycle, and we need to look at the entire life cycle, and there are some room for maneuver. For example, how can we reduce energy consumption for building materials? Because upon building stage, we need to use a lot of curtain wall and machinery, equipment, and concrete and steel. And this is a very important consideration for a super high-rise building. Sometimes, for example, for a building with a height of over 400 meters, sometimes there will be attrition of those spaces and materials. There will be, excessive consumption of materials. So in terms of a structural calculation, the volume of a use for steel reinforcement and a concrete, there will be a lot of waste and attrition of the materials along the way.
So they have their specialty. After years of experience, they have accumulated a lot of knowledge. Take the Tianjin 117 project, for instance. When we first took over this project, the floor slabs had very high thickness, and the total volume was 75,000 cubic meters for the basement. But then we did some work on this project and found that this project adopted a lot of new technologies, and then the thickness was reduced to 6 meters, and that reduced the use of rebar and concrete by 10,000 cubic meters, and economically that saved about 40 to 50 million Chinese yuan. So it's about the consumables, the variables. It's just like if you can make the project more efficient, like if the ratio is 72.5% of occupancy, then you get a lot more space, and that can still serve people. That's the kind of space that serves people, and that makes your project more economical as well. So about the active and passive spaces, and about the consumables, the materials in the construction, we use these technologies. And secondly, the technology is also about energy consumption. The first is about the designed theoretical energy consumption, and the other is the actual energy consumption during the operation. Take the electricity consumption in Jingmao Tower, this building, for instance. We did a lot of statistical work and found that during designing, because of poor experience from the past decade or so, they designed the electricity consumption to be much higher than the actual use. But now, we dare to use new technologies so that the cost can be lowered at the early stage. About the purchase of the electric power, and also about operation. As we mentioned, there are intelligent technologies, intelligent buildings, smart buildings. We need to have those monitors, those sensors to monitor every part of the building. Let's say if the room is cool enough, the air conditioner can be turned down to save energy. And also about the curtain wall, the cladding. We used to have this kind of ventilators installed on the curtain wall, and at the height of about 250 meters, we used natural ventilation to save energy. These are just technologies that help save energy, and they actually help us save energy and enhance efficiency and save cost. So these are the things I can summarize based on what the speakers shared, and I welcome further discussion with you.
Do you have any kind of experience questioning people which already lives in such vertical city, in such high rise? What is the reaction of the people? Do they like it? Do they want it? Are they in favor of living in such a building? This is the first question. The second one, do you think that the vertical city suits to all social economical groups of the population? Do you understand what I was saying?
So first of all, these are two very good questions. At the end of my presentation, I also thought we should not do too many mega structures. The reason is we do not know how people's reactions will be. That's why we don't want to build very many mega structures very suddenly. But luckily, in Shanghai, already many tall buildings, mega structures are being used. So our understanding is different from what many architects may expect. That is, most of the users, most of the residents, they enjoy such experience very much. They like it very much when they live in such tall buildings above 100 meters. There are many reasons for it. First, it provides privacy for the residents. And secondly, it provides a great view, a great visual effect, which is a scarce resource in a city like Shanghai. And thirdly, about the research we have done on the residents in the super tall buildings, they have ideas that surprised us. In many countries, scholars told us that living in the super tall structures will be bad for children. But according to the research we did in Shanghai, most parents believe it has no negative impact on the children. And many parents find that children living in super tall buildings actually have better language skills and communication skills, which is very different from what people usually expect. But we still need to pay attention to the trend and do research on even taller buildings and their residents. But we do not have very scientific methods to do such research because there are still not so many people living in such super tall buildings. Okay, about this first question, let me add something. It's a very good question. I personally now live in a super tall building. It's about 32 meters tall building, around 100 meters tall, 32 stories, 100 meters tall building in Shanghai. And you want to know the experience of people who live in such buildings. So the academia think it's about the psychological acceptance of the height. It's not just about the technology, it's also about the psychology of the residents in such buildings. In Shanghai, the population density is very high. Therefore, it is by far easier for people to accept the experience of living in tall buildings. But in those sparsely populated areas, people find it difficult to accept it. So as Professor Huang just mentioned, residents feel very good. Like I feel good about living in such a building. I mean, it's a crowded city. Land is very limited. So I enjoy living in it. We will have to live in such buildings, and it's very convenient. Commuting is easy. I can still go to the old neighborhood very easily, and I get all the facilities and amenities very easily. So it's really about the psychological acceptance of the height, as I think. That's about the first question. And your second question, I think, is about whether the super tall buildings are suitable for all social and economic classes, groups. So I think it's probably not suitable for every social class and economic groups. It's about certain tax. It's about the local background. If it's a city where the land is in short supply, then the super tall buildings can help a lot of people. But we shouldn't only emphasize the height, like 500 or 600 meters or 700 meters. As we just discussed, we should not just think about one single building, but the interconnection between different tall buildings. So I believe in different cities and different societies, there may be different answers to such a question. I don't know if that is a satisfying answer to you.
I wanted to ask a question about urbanism, because we've been talking a lot about vertical, but the symposium or the conference is really about urbanism, which is vertical. So I think from an architect's point of view, the towers that we've been talking about, some of the technical issues we've been talking about are totally fascinating, inspiring, and so on. But in this case, I think the majority of them are not urban in any way. I mean, at the base, yes, but from the second floor up, or even from the lobby up, they're completely private. You can't go into them. They're not public in any way. So what I'm wondering is, I mean, we have a kind of idea that forward motion is not always progress, you know? And sometimes I think that working in China, there's a number of underlying issues or ideas that are being kind of blindly followed. One, for example, that was brought up today was this Le Corbusier's radiant city model. And from the moment I came to Shenzhen, where I live 8 years ago, I said to myself, like, from the first day, I said, whoa, wow, this is the radiant city realized in a contemporary version. You know, where you have these mega blocks with more or less separated towers and unwalkable distances between them, separated by huge wide roads and things that it's a very, on the one hand, you look from the top, it's a very green city, but from your pedestrian experience or a citizen's experience, it's not green at all. So to get to an actual question, I'm just wondering, also doing a lot of urban design in China, what I've realized is that a lot of times when we get a so-called urban design project, we already have a map with roads drawn all over it, and a lot of the blocks are already divided. And I think, in fact, that the road system and this block network is what really sets the tone for the city from the beginning. And so I'm wondering, what are we doing to, why is it that we're receiving, like, the design institutes, even in so-called urban design competitions, in basically every level of design, that road network is already been laid down by a government institution, and in a lot of cases in a very, very cursory manner, and that it's really influencing the urban development, I think, in a not so good way. And so why is that, and what can we do to challenge that, is kind of my question.
It's a very good question. Let me try to answer it. As Chinese people often say, no medicine cures regret, and indeed, it is an issue. Moving ahead is not always progress, and we know we are faced with challenges. Like Lujiazui district right here, it's not a perfect result of urban planning. I knew when they did urban planning for Lujiazui district, they had two schools of thoughts. One is to make it very dense, like the New York style. The other is the garden style. a lot of space between buildings and a lot of trees and greenery between buildings. And later, the second school of thoughts prevailed. And now we can see that there are lots of changes. One change is, as one speaker mentioned, that is, 3 rules are united. That is, 3 rules are integrated. So usually, the traditional way of doing the urban planning is first do a master plan and then a local plan, and thirdly, the construction plan. These 3 things were separated in the past, and the problem is the master plan only distributes the land to different people, and then about the more detailed plan, it should have been done by the urban planner, but the next step, the next stage of the planning cannot go against the previous urban planning. Therefore, the government now knows it's a challenge. Now the government knows that it's a challenge, and they are trying to integrate these three types of planning. That's something we learned, a lesson we learned from the past.